I am live. Excellent. Good evening. Good evening. My name is Ron Skowronski, and it is my privilege and pleasure to be here with you this evening at Fellowships of the Spirit. I believe these little reflections, as I like to call them, are called Fireside Chats. And I'm here to tell you it's been so warm today, we didn't light the fire. So maybe with a couple of my comments or insights, I can light a fire under you. Today is, as I said a moment ago, is a very beautiful day, very beautiful evening. And it's good to be alive. It's good to be here. And it's interesting, you know, a lot of the times when I'm asked to give a reflection or sometimes, as I call it, kind of old school language, preach a sermon, I have a tendency of speaking of a lot of things that relate to social justice, the manifestation of peace, and how spirituality indeed is an extraordinarily vital component to the idea of developing a world that truly works for everyone. And I had occasion to be speaking with my wife last few days, and we've been talking about that. And she says, you know, in her worldview, one of the things that drew her to the religion, the philosophy, and the science of spiritualism was what draws so many people. And that was not just the discussion of, let's say, a philosophy or even a religion per se, but that it was the science. And what I mean by science, and I think what she meant by science, was some of the phenomenon of spiritualism. And you know, more often than not, what occurs is when people talk about phenomena, it is reflected in subjective experiences that are true for the person experiencing them. And they experience what's called, I know that I know that I know. In other words, whatever they've experienced is so evidential to them, so powerful, so compelling, that they are encouraged to move forward beyond that science and to study what is behind that science. And that, again, is the spiritual and philosophical foundations of the great faith tradition that is called spiritualism. And I remember back when I was in my mid-teens and not quite into my 20th year on this planet, I was of that same interest. I had read some of the books by Hans Holzer. I was becoming more and more interested and I was able to be conversational with other like-minded people in the works of folks like Edgar Cayce, the fellow who is called the Sleeping Prophet, or one of the greatest, in my opinion, spirit mediums, though he's not often referred to that in many circles. And again, Edgar Cayce. And of course, some of the great spiritualist authors like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and so forth. These were some of the things that I was, as they might say, cutting my teeth on. But again, it all began with an interest in the phenomena. And nowadays, or I should, and this is not universally true, it's true in areas, and it has to be acknowledged in order to be properly dealt with. When you say, oh yes, I'm interested in spiritualism, or I'm studying to spiritualism, or even more affirmatively, I am a spiritualist, all too often people say, oh my God, what's that? They either have no clue what that's all about, or they have an enormous amount of misconceptions, things that, when I hear them, absolutely make me cringe. A lot of it, of course, is due to and it's not necessarily intentional, but the things that are produced in Hollywood and so forth. And so there's always in the Hollywood mix the quote spiritualist medium who looks not particularly human in most cases, but looks very, I'll use the word weird, and has behaviors that are very off-putting. And so it doesn't surprise me that so many people to this day really still don't have a clue what spiritualism is, and even worse, what spiritualism isn't. With that as kind of my prelude, I wanted to share with you perhaps a couple of instances, a couple of phenomenal instances that could be construed of as subjective, but I view them also to a degree as objective, that may help you understand what it was that motivated me to go from a, quote, not a skeptic, but an open-minded non-believer to a absolutely open-minded believer, and beyond a believer, someone who is to this very day committed to the gospel, the good news that there is no death, there are no dead, of spiritualism. And I want to go back. I know I don't look it, and many of you are probably saying, gosh, he looks young. But I'm going to be 65 years old this August, this end of August. And this experience I'm going to share with you this evening happened to me, I would say, when I was about 22, maybe 23 years old. I had already begun my involvement in the movement in a very significant way. I had become a member of a church. I had studied psychic unfoldment. I took psychic unfoldment classes. I was working with a healing ministry. I was in both feet as much as I possibly could, because I had had a few what I would call significant, but still not necessarily major experiences, but enough of an experience to teach me that there was infinitely more to this than meets the eye, that this was well beyond my intellectual understanding at that time, and I needed to know so much more. At the time, I was in a position where I was working with my pastor in Rochester, New York, the Reverend Harry Bender, who was also my teacher, if you will. And I was in the process of getting ready to take my final examinations with the National Spiritualist Association of Churches to become what is called a licentiate minister, to begin a career in full ministry. And I'd gotten a phone call, and the phone call came from the wife of a dear friend, and her name was Ruth. And Ruth called me and said, I need your help. And I said, well, of course. And she said, my grandmother is 92 years old. She's in hospital, and she is dying. She needs a minister. And I said to her, well, I would be honored to be of service, but I do have a question. Does she not have her own clergy? And it's a legitimate question, by the way. And she said, well, she does and she doesn't. She was a member of the Salvationists, whom all of us know to be the Salvation Army, an organization I have a deep respect for, though there are dynamic theological differences, as you might imagine. And she said that her grandma, whose name was also Ruth, was a founding member in this particular group of Salvationists, so much so to the point that she was the lady who was wearing what you would call the full regalia or the full outfit of the Salvationists, the ladies at the time, and who would be ringing the tambourine and collecting money for the poor in the kettle and all that. And I said, well, why are not the Salvationists coming to meet her needs? There was an issue that had arisen where there was some type of a reorganization, some type of a situation where there just were not the appropriate people available. It was not their fault in any way, shape, or form. She said, you're it. I said, well, you've got to realize theologically, we are apples and concrete. I said, but I will do what I can. As I approached her room, and Spirit was very close to me at that moment, and it fell upon me and urged me to deal with her. And here, you got to realize, I was only in my early 20s. Deal with her the way that she needs to be dealt with. You're not here to convince her of your truth, your faith, your convictions. You are here to meet her needs. Pardon me. So I walked into the hospital room, and suffice it to say, that's exactly what we did. When she needed prayer, we prayed the Lord's Prayer. It got to the point where she said to me, "Can you sing?" And I said, "I can't carry a tune in a paper sack, but we can try." And there was a hymnal there, and we sung the Old Rugged Cross and a variety of other hymns. And it got to the point where, at the time she was ready to truly make her transition, she indeed called for me to come to be at her bedside. What was interesting is, at the time, shortly before she made this transition, I said to her, for the sake of clarity and ecclesiastical honesty, I said, "You know, Ruth, I don't share your faith the way you understand it." She said, "I've always known that." And there would be no way on a human level that she could possibly know that, because in that particular situation, if I must pat myself on the back, I was an excellent actor. But I needed to meet her needs, and that was, for me, the prime directive. So she made her transition, and I was privileged to be requested to preside at her funeral service. And that was probably one of the most difficult things I could do in my youth, in my youthful ministry. A few weeks later, I was just about ready to leave for my examinations, my oral presentations, and I said to myself, I've got to clear my head. I was grieving because she and I were not just minister and let's call it congregant, we had become close friends. And that happened in an extraordinary, as you can imagine, short period of time. So I said, I've got to go to Lilydale, because that has always been my home away from home, my spiritual home. And I've just got to go there and clear my head. I need to walk by Inspiration Stump. I need to spend a little time at the Forest Temple. I need to go by the lake and just release this grief and know that she is in the exact place that Infinite Holy Spirit would have her be, in perfect peace, in perfect health, in perfect balance. Well, I got there, and fast forward, after spending some time relaxing and taking it easy, I went down to Inspiration Stump, and a gentleman there, one of a very, very competent, a very good medium, and happened to be, I believe, president of the Lilydale Assembly Board of Trustees at the time, Mr. Robert Sable, was there, and he was jotting down a few notes and so forth, and he saw me. He says, "Ron," and he didn't know me from a bag of beans, as one might say. He said, "Do you think you could give some spirit greetings this afternoon?" And I was candid and honest. I said, "You know, I've had a few bumps and grinds over the past few weeks." I said, "I don't think I could do it justice. So please, I'll take a rain check, and I will serve another time." And he said, "That's fine." And so I started walking away, and then he turned to me and he said, "Ron, I've got to talk to you." And I'm thinking, is he going to give me the hard sell now? Does he really need me? So I turned around and said, "What is it, Bob?" And he said, "I've got to bring you this lady from Spirit." He then, over the next, I would say, 5 to 7 minutes, proceeded to bring through Ruth, and brought her through in such profound clarity that he would have literally had to have sat on my shoulders. I mean, he brought me the kind of clarity that a police sketch artist wouldn't have. In his description of her, her mannerisms, her idiosyncrasies, all of it. So much so that no one, even the most hardened skeptic, could say, I don't believe it. It was just that accurate. And then came the most important message. She wanted to express happy birthday greetings to me, which I was about maybe a month or so away from my birthday. We never talked about my birthday. She wanted to express her deep gratitude for helping her make the transition, and that she was happy. And here's the most important thing. In her hospitalization, she was always afraid that the pain would never stop. Here I was assuring her that there would come a time when she would be 100% pain-free. And she came back to tell me that I was right. And the last thing, and the most poignant thing, which drew crocodile tears from my eyes, she wanted to thank me for helping her in that transition. And I knew what she meant. Spirit was right there between the three of us, Ruth, Bob, and me. And I knew what she meant. As I was led of the Holy Spirit, if you will, to step aside my theologies, my philosophies, my values, whatever you want to call them, and just allowed love and love alone to be my guidepost, guided by infinite intelligence, guided by Holy Spirit, she now came and gave me that same courtesy, that same love, where she was able to put aside her theology, her philosophy, her values. And I learned in that brief encounter that it was love that is what holds the universe together. It is love that is at the core of anything and everything. And that when they do say God is love, they're not just whistling Dixie. I wanted to share that story with you. To those of you who are suffering with loss, perhaps you've lost a loved one to COVID. Perhaps you've lost a loved one to so many other causes. But also to those who are seeking spiritual awareness and spiritual understanding. This is not something that we play with. This is not something we do for mirth or merriment, and surely not for what some accuse us of, strictly economic gain. This is a legitimate and a transcendental spirituality that is the truth that will help set you free on so many levels, not as only as we prepare for the greater life to come to each and every one of us, but also as we stay in this experience and expression to love, care for, and cherish each other, to look beyond our differences, to acknowledge our unity, to acknowledge that we are all in this together, and in so doing, proclaim that those that see God must see God within the heart, within the eyes of another human being. There are so many other stories I could share with you, and I'll have to make them for another time. But I want to share with you that story with the hope that it has inspired you, comforted you, and uplifted you. And many of you, I'm sure, have your own stories, and it's appropriate for us to share that with each other for our mutual growth and mutual strength. It has, again, been a privilege and an honor to be here with you, and I bid you peace, the peace that transcends mortal understanding, the peace of infinite spirit. Thank you, and bless